For joining. So thank you everyone for joining today. I'm Miriam Green. I'm Director of Marketing and Alumni Affairs at American of the Hebrew University. And we can just make sure. Hi, Lilach. One sec. Thank you. All right, so let's continue. Lilach is our third panelist, and we're very happy she's here, along with Micah and Erez. So for those of you who might be joining us for the first time or haven't been with us in a little bit, there's lots of ways you can get involved with the Alumni Association and or American Friends of the Hebrew University. If you're an alum, if you want to share your story and photos, we love being able to then share them, share the memories and profiles on our alumni. If you have a job opening, please let us know. We can put it on our alumni job board. We're also happy to help if you're interested in organizing a reunion for people you went to Hebrew University with. And you can also give to two great projects. One is the Alumni Annual Fund, which supports student scholarships, and our Igniting Impact Initiative, which supports 3 Tikkun Olam related projects at the university. They are the Ethiopian Farmers Outreach Project, the Legal Clinic for Representation of Marginalized Communities, and helping with Global, which is our master's degree in community development. And for there, we're looking to support internships for students as well as seed funding for alumni projects. And you can also, of course, always join events that we have, both online and hopefully more in person soon. Our next event will be on April 10th for another special edition of the hit Facebook game, Who Knows One, which you'll hear about more shortly. And we're going to host it on the AFHU Facebook page, and we're going to have alumni and AFHU friends join in for some friendly competition. So for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the game, in essence, if you combine Jewish geography and 6 degrees of separation, put them together and put it on Facebook, you get Who Knows One. We are still looking for some contestants, and you do not have to be an alum to participate. So if you're interested in participating in the game or to learn more about any of the previous activities I mentioned, please email alumni@afhu.org. Today, we're going to be taking questions at the end of the panel discussion. So to submit a question, please type it in the Q&A chat box, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce our 3 great panelists for a very unique conversation. First, we have Lilach Rapaport, also goes by Lily. She was born and raised on a kibbutz in Israel's Golan Heights. She studied economics and accounting at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and graduated in 2012. She then joined KPMG's consulting practice in Tel Aviv for a few years. Wanting to transition out of finance and consulting, she decided to do her MBA at the University of Chicago School of Business and figure out what she wanted to do when she grew up. She then worked for Amazon for 4 years and realized her passion was actually product management in the machine learning space. She now works for a small startup company you might have heard of called Google as a PM for search natural language understanding. Next, we have Erez Podoly, who is the father of 2 amazing teenagers, both competitive swimmers that prosper socially and academically in the Bay Area of San Francisco. Dr. Podoly is the head of therapeutic and diagnostic desks at Cleveland Clinic Ventures and a board member of 5 portfolio companies. Prior to Cleveland Clinic Ventures, he was focused on health tech and biotech investments at Artemin Ventures, a Silicon Venture VC firm. Erez is a serial entrepreneur, the founder and CEO of 3 startups focused on non-invasive diagnostics. Dr. Podoly is a thought leader, a frequent invited speaker, including a TED Talk, an active panelist, as you will see today, and a judge in startup competitions. He has a PhD in neurobiology, which focuses on Alzheimer's research, a master's in biochemistry, which focuses on cancer research, and a bachelor's in chemistry, all from Hebrew University. At Stanford, Erez pursued postdoctoral research with a Nobel laureate in chemistry. And he is also an awarded poet. He published his first poetry book in Israel several years ago, and his second book is soon to be published. And last but certainly not least is Micah Hart, the creator and host of Who Knows One and the Campfires and Color Wars podcast. He is also an award-winning content marketer who has overseen digital and social media for brands like the Atlanta Hawks, Buffalo Wild Wings, and more. He currently lives in Atlanta with his wife and 2 children and wants everyone to remember that we are still in the pandemic, so please be nice to yourselves and others. Thank you all for joining us, and let's get started. So the first question is is failure necessary for success? Anyone want to jump in?
I'll jump in. I'll just say that I don't know that I think failure is necessary for success, but I think it always helps redefine success. I think it's great. It's sort of like the boxing analogy that everyone has a game plan until you get punched in the face. I think that it's amazing to succeed without any potholes, but if you follow that path without ever making mistakes or failing, eventually it will happen to you and you will not know how to deal with it. So I don't know if it's necessary, but I definitely think it's helpful.
So I can jump in and share that when I asked Miriam why she chose me to for this panel, she commented that she wouldn't pick someone, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Miriam, someone unemployed who still lives with his mom in the basement.
You are correct.
That made me think about the representation of the metaphoric basement as an antonym of success. And so Lily, I Googled success right after that call. And the first result out of about 3 billion results was that successful life means being fulfilled, happy, safe, healthy, and loved. Even that was part of that definition. Now, can that person in the basement feel happy, safe, healthy, and loved? Possibly. Is this person fulfilled? I doubt it, because I think for accomplishments and achievements, we need to go out of our comfort zone. I try to walk independently, fall, try again, fall again, and only eventually walk, maybe even run. So there is an easy initial answer, at least, to is a failure necessary for success? If you use this simple analogy and ask the rhetorical question, can a baby learn how to walk without falling? But there's actually more to it, if this is not a very long answer. And you, Micah, you touched actually the core of it. Success is also relative. In our routine life, we do not consider or count walking a success. However, if we had an accident, a car accident that left us handicapped in a wheelchair for a year, and then after a year of PT, we would have a sense of accomplishments once we walk again. And in a similar manner, let's say most of us wouldn't consider graduating from high school a big achievement or a sign of success, but maybe those who experience humble starts would do. And so I think that many times failure and success is all about perception. Unfortunately, we learn to appreciate success, to cherish it, to embrace it, only after experiencing difficulties, punched in the face, as you said, Micah. And yes, when we experience failures.
That's a great answer. Lilach, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I agree with the comments around success being, a matter of personal definition. As far as, failure being necessary, so I can share, something, from kind of working at Google. We work in a framework that is called, OKRs, where we basically every year and every quarter we sit down as a team and we set goals for the team and what we want to achieve. And we've had similar exercises at Amazon, and I'm sure every company and a lot of individuals would go through the same exercise, personally speaking as well. And if you're at the end of the year, or at the end of the quarter, are trending green, as we call it, on all your goals and everything that you wanted to accomplish, there's something to be said, about whether or not the goals that you set up for yourself were ambitious enough. And so in that sense, I think, is failure necessary for success? I personally don't believe so, and we can talk about it a little bit. We kind of talked about research that I've been reading out of University of Chicago that kind of suggests the other way around. But I will say that if you haven't failed, it probably means that maybe you haven't set your goals and ambitious ambitions high enough, and you're letting maybe some of your own personal perception hold you back because you're only trying to achieve the things that you know you'll be able to do quite well to begin with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, you know, I know when we talked before, you know, most people, at least on social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, we really only see the best of what people have to share. It's only the good stuff. So if someone gets married, they're not going to usually talk about when they get divorced, or if they get let go from a job. Most people don't talk about that. They talk about getting hired for a new job. So I'm curious, for the three of you, what's an example of a time, whether professionally or academically, when things did not go your way, and how you dealt with that, and if it in fact turned out potentially like to be a good thing in the end? Erez or Lilach, you want to go first?
I can go first, and actually, you know, just I plan to say later in the conversation, but yes, a failure analysis is not the culture and the theme of, you know, many events and panels and so on, conferences, and it's a pity, and maybe I'll explain later why, because that's the best way to learn. And you know, the way you phrase the question, if there are examples of times, you know, professionally when things didn't go my way, well, I feel that my career things never went my way. It has always been an uphill battle. Now I can give my PhD as an example, and it's an interesting evolution. So I'll describe it from scratch. I started my PhD studies actually 3 times. I started once with 1 PI, and then with a new PI several months later, started from scratch. Then 2 years later, I started from scratch again. You know, if it was a startup, we would say I pivoted. It started from scratch, new research area, new research tools. A third choice on paper turned out to be a huge success. You know, 10 scientific publications and book chapters. And what we did is my third attempt was focused on Alzheimer's disease. We developed a peptide inhibitor that slows down the pace of amyloid aggregation, and amyloids are those toxic elements that kill neurons in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. And we had a patent, and our patent was sold to a company that later IPO'd, created an exhibition for the National Museum of Science in Israel, based on the work of my PhD. And I was invited by a Nobel laureate to a postdoc in his lab at Stanford. Theoretically on paper, wow, right choice, big success, good grit, you know, and persistence. Nevertheless, the story is worthless without the perspective again. And 10 years later, there is still no cure for Alzheimer's disease. And as a scientist, I feel this is mission unaccomplished. You know, it reminds me actually to be more humble before I develop a sense of accomplishment too early, and reps it up in the right way. So did thing go my way? I'm not so sure. It depends how you measure success and how you measure failure.
It's a really valid point to also, you know, always consider perspective when you're considering every situation. Lilach, you were going to say something too?
Yeah, I was going to say that on the question on kind of turning failure into a learning experience, I think it's a very loaded question in my opinion. I do think that process of shifting things and how you perceive them is super, super critical, right? Turning something that is probably not going as well as you wanted to looking into the positive is a very powerful and very powerful psychological mechanism. And without it, I think through personal and professional experiences, it's going to be very, very hard for you to pick yourself back up, because if failure, small ones and big ones, are a real part of life. And for me, you know, I've definitely had I think every week there's some sense of failure, right? Depending on how you measure, to what extent you measure failure. But similar to Erez, I also had, failures in the academic setting. For example, like I told you, in the Hebrew University, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer for whatever reason. And before school even started, I went to orientation. They took us to the Supreme Court in Jerusalem. And this was before school even started. This was orientation, minus 3 days. And I realized I couldn't even sit. I couldn't even sit at court and listen to the legal discussions because it was just so unlike me. I'm a very quant person, and at that point in time, it was too late for me to back out of it because I've already kind of missed the deadline to transition into something else. And before I knew it, I kind of basically sunk a year down the drain. I had to pause everything for a year. I gave it a few more weeks to try things out, but I ended up dropping out. That was definitely, a failure. A lot of failures have real costs associated with them. And it's really important to remember that. Did I learn from that? I did. I learned that I shouldn't commit so much of myself without taking smaller risks and iterating in smaller pieces before throwing myself into something really big that has a huge risk, like kind of basically doing some level of risk management. So later down the line, when I joined Chicago Booth for my MBA, I was actually, and I still am, very, very interested in Erez's world of biotech and neuroscience, and really wanted to work in that world. But I made sure in my first year to expose myself enough to that world and do an internship and work with startups and do enough of that to understand, is that the right fit for me, before I end up, taking a full-time job in that space and really committing. And it turns out that it wasn't exactly what I had imagined. And so I did for sure learn from that. But I will share here, like, the research coming out of University of Chicago from Ayelet Fishbach, who is a Tel Aviv University alum. But we can still talk about Tel Aviv University.
It's fine.
No, the other one.
It's fine. Not everyone's perfect. It's okay.
Yeah, but she has research coming out of University of Chicago Booth, and they research failure. And they were able to actually understand that people learn less from failure than they do success. There's an ego that is involved in the process of failure that makes you basically unremember some of the things that you might have learned. It makes you be less, the feedback of failure, that rejection makes you shut down to your learning experience. And you actually learn much more when you watch other people either fail or succeed compared to your own failure. So you actually do learn more from success than you do failure, at least based on that research. I think it's just a point to remember. And again, back to kind of mitigating risks. If you can learn from other people's experience, if you can mitigate your risks to fail, I think those are all good ideas. And we do that in product management a lot. We iterate on a product very early on in the process before we commit, years and years of engineers and marketing and UX resources into launching a product that you don't know how that's going to end up performing in the real world. You do it little by little, right? You kind of launch a very minimal version of your product, you test it out, you get feedback on it. If it fails, that's okay. You can still pivot. You haven't really jumped all the way into it. So it's just, I think, a matter of mitigating that risk and being mindful of the costs that can be associated with the risks that you're taking.
Yeah, that is a very good answer. And I think also offers a very different perspective than what a lot of people think, is that you have to personally fail to succeed. And sometimes, as we're learning, that is the case, but sometimes you can learn better from others too. Micah, you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I think you both touched on something that's interesting to me, and that is perception and sort of like learning from other people's experiences. I think experience is the operating word for me. I think that there is a fear of failure, and part of why I think people probably don't learn as much from failure is as success is because there's such a stigma attached to it, that there's something wrong with you if you fail at something. And I think that it's easier to disagree with that voice in your head once you've experienced failure or setback or rejection and you've come out the other side of it. But if you've never experienced it, then the first time it happens, I think it's really jarring. And so, you asked about an example from our professional lives. I got laid off for my job with the Hawks, and it was true. I mean, really the first time I had legitimately been let go from an organization. And it's very easy, no matter what your circumstances are, when you get laid off or let go, to feel like it's your fault. What did I do wrong, etc. That's not always the case. But I think that even just the getting laid off and going through the experience of not having a job and figuring out what I wanted to do next and going through the process of finding something else, I'd always been afraid of it because I'd never experienced it before. Once I went through it and came out on the other side, it put me in a much better emotional place when it happened again, when I was at Buffalo Wild Wings, which led to the creation of Who Knows One. I'd be lying to say it didn't faze me at all, but it certainly had much less of an emotional impact on me the second time than it did the first, because I'd had that experience. So to me, part of what is so valuable about failure or anything is just having that experience to know that, like, I can take something from this, I can grow from this, and things will be okay. And the more that happens, the softer the landing is. I'd be curious, Lilach, with that research, I'd love to know more if they're going back to people over the course of time who have continued to fail, and if it gets less worse, whatever the term would be, over time. I don't know.
I can definitely share it in the chat box in a little bit. I don't think they had the research executed over a long period of time, but I can double check that for you. But I just wanted to comment on something that you said that I thought it was really, really important. I think a lot of the times people shy away from failure in a sense that they see the failure in front of their eyes and they're doing so much to just not go there. And I think that in itself might be a failure, right? It's about knowing when to walk away, knowing when to say, you know what, I've tried something, it failed. It's time for me to reevaluate, to reassess, to maybe pivot. And, it happens in relationships, like kind of when is the right time to walk away from a relationship? It happens like at a work or a job that you feel like you've kind of done, you gave it all you had, and things are not really going your way. And I think it's important to not be afraid, to your point, like not be afraid of knowing when to say, I've failed, and move on.
Yeah, and actually that is going to lead us into our next two questions. So the next one, and I actually am probably going to start with it, is are there learning opportunities from mistakes? And I know, again, we touched on this a little bit, but I can personally share, I was just out of school looking for a job. I had applied for one at an environmental organization, very excited. I get the interview and I'm asked to describe climate change. And I couldn't do it. And I knew instantly. I mean, that was the end for me. And of course, you can imagine how fun it was to later be in the elevator with the person I interviewed with. But I mean, for me, it was for sure a huge, learning opportunity. Obviously, big mistake on my part, but I learned I really needed to do a lot more prep and more research for any position I wanted to apply to moving forward. So I guess the next question, and Lilach, if you want to start, do we see learning opportunities from whether it's a mistake or a failure, in any, whether it's academic or professional?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. Are there learning opportunities or growth opportunities from, from making mistakes or when something failed?
No, I think absolutely. But I think it doesn't, back to what we talked about before, right? Like there's this culture nowadays of celebrating failure I think that's fine. But I don't think, learning from failures, I don't think it just magically happens in the sense that we kind of celebrate failure as a learning opportunity. I think learning is an active is an active process, right? So for you to learn from failures, I think it deserves a lot of retrospective with yourself, maybe documenting what you've done, in a way that works for you, how things went wrong, and really thinking through what needed to happen differently in order for you to learn, in order for you to not repeat mistakes the next time. And sometimes it takes more than one time failing at the same thing. Like for me, I know that I'm a very impatient person. And so for me, a lot of my failures are a result of me just wanting to drive things forward, just wanting to go fast and go all in and kind of move on. And a lot of the times I don't have the patience to sit through something and let things unfold in a way that would help me then mitigate risks. I still do those mistakes. I try to learn from them. I try to have that process of active learning over why I failed. But we all have our natural tendencies. And I think without really paying attention and actively learning from our mistakes, we miss those opportunities.
Yeah, I have so many things to say about all these. And actually, let's make it interesting. I disagree with some of it. Let's argue. So it goes back to things that you said about the former question. So for many years, I used to go to events in the Silicon Valley, talks, meetups, focus on success stories of high profile business professionals and specifically entrepreneurs. But I felt empty after these events. I couldn't learn lessons, take home messages, do's and don'ts, and that I wish to learn to extract from these events. And here's an interesting fact. A startup needs hundreds of things to work in sync to succeed. Many times one single element can lead to a failure that brings the company down to its knees and to shut down. But this is why I very much want to see this research you've done at Chicago. Failure analysis. It's not just telling about failure. It's failure analysis. Unfortunately, is not the culture and the theme in those events. So I stopped going to those events and search for entrepreneurs who can boldly discuss issues that other fellow entrepreneurs have not shared before. And I reached out to those individuals who were ready to, honestly and transparently share and analyze. The word analyze is very, very important here. Analyze miserable failures rather than their shiny success stories. And I think that part of being an entrepreneur, a true entrepreneur, is to learn from these mistakes. I'm also patient-less, so it's hard to avoid repeating mistakes, over the same mistakes over and over again. But I'm kind of innovative. I just invent new mistakes, and then I make new mistakes, and I'm very innovative about making mistakes. It might sound funny, but maybe this is the essence of it. I think mistakes are learning opportunities. If there's a big if here, if shared transparently and analyzed thoroughly. I think that's my feeling about mistakes as learning opportunities.
I think you touched on something that I think is really important with the context of how you're evaluating the mistakes. So I worked in social media for most of my career, and social media is pretty well established at this point. 15 years on, what have you. But the truth is, it's still changing every day. New platforms, new ways of communicating, and people are constantly learning. And I always likened working in social media as just exploring a cave without a flashlight. You don't have any idea where you're going, and you don't, the only way to sort of map the path is just by bumping into things. And so the organizations that, in my opinion, do social media or other types of content marketing well are the ones who aren't afraid to bump against the boundaries. If you're not searching for the boundaries, then you can't do anything interesting. But the ones who are willing to take chances, mitigated risk, I think, is still important there, like Lilach said. But the ones who are willing to take chances are the ones who are going to stand out. But with that comes learning where the boundaries are. And you can't learn where the boundaries are unless you do something that touches a boundary. So if you work in an environment where when something goes beyond a boundary, you can take a step back and say, okay, well, that didn't work, or we shouldn't do that again for whatever reason, and move on, then that's a great opportunity to learn and build guardrails for yourself as you go so that you can get smarter and continue to do things well, but maybe not put yourself in harm's way. What I think is challenging, and what is unfortunately often the case to what you're saying, Erez, is a lot of times people say that they are willing to make mistakes and talk about them transparently. And that's not always the case when it actually ends up happening. And I think, to my own credit or discredit, I have often found myself at odds over my tolerance for risk within the people that I worked with. Because, like I said, to me, every mistake is a learning experience, and we're just trying to figure it out as we go. But that, to me, is a huge piece of it, is just, learn from the mistakes and try not to repeat them. Like you said, make new mistakes. Keep making them. Don't repeat them. That's where I think you really get in a lot of trouble.
Well, that actually leads into the next question, is that can you ever fail or make a mistake too many times? If it's kind of like, I think it's the comedian Jeff Dunham, like, here's your sign, like at what point, I'll use this as an example. I am far from an athletic person by any stretch. I would never like it, but I really wanted to try and play basketball, but I can never make any shots. I try and I try and I do the practices and I do the drills, but I can't do it. Like, at what point, like, how many shots do you have to miss before you're like, maybe this is not what I should be doing?
I want to answer that because I think it's something I talk about a lot with what we do in content marketing, and that's just the idea of like what makes a compelling story. A compelling story is not win. If you ever read about like the hero's journey, all of the movies that basically follow the same path, it's you succeed and then you fall down and then you succeed and then something terrible happens, and it's not linear, and this is hard to do in a Zoom window. But ultimately what makes the story satisfying is seeing someone repeatedly face obstacles and overcome them. So to me, your experience of shooting baskets, like, you got to keep at it. But if you do eventually get to the point where you make one, it will feel so satisfying because of all the work you put into getting there. And so, I think, yes, you can make the same mistake too many times in lots of different ways. And I think Lilach talked about this a lot. Like, if you continue, it's the definition of insanity. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, that's not a good strategy. But I do think there's value in continuing to do something if it's important to you, because once you finally get there, it will be so much more worth it.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, first, the legendary example of Steve Jobs, I think, is admirable because he failed so many times. He was fired from his own company by Arthur Rock, his board member. He failed miserably with Newton before he was able to create the iPhone. Not even many people know the business history here, and burned $100 million, in times that $100 million meant something. And so repeating the question, can every failure make a mistake too many times? Can you ever fail or make mistakes too many times? The lawyer's answer is it depends. I posted this event in LinkedIn using something similar to what you said, Micah, using Churchill's quote, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." And per Churchill, it is not about the failure or success. It's about grit, continuity, persistence, perseverance. It's about rolling the same rock up the same hill over and over and over again in a Sisyphean manner. It's the climb, if you will, and not the summit. Unfortunately, I really regret it, failure is not a badge of honor. And society is not so patient, and specifically business professionals are not so forgiving and accepting. And when serial entrepreneurs experience serial failures, they will face hard time in everything. Fundraising for their startup, challenge. They'll have faced challenges recruiting talented team members, and kicking off new startup companies might become almost impractical. So I failed with my first two startups, and my last third attempt is called Mitigate, which is a word game between mitigate, the word that you, Lilach, said several times, and a gate. What we do here. It's not another diagnostic startup like the two previous ones. I pivoted my last idea, and when like the world of diagnostics, we pivoted to detecting COVID, not surprisingly. But we understood that we're late into this market. What we can do is catch the market, wait for the next phase when the world opens, which is practically is happening now. And what we've created, we took a test, made it even faster. We have a 1-minute test for COVID, and we embedded it in an airport check-in kiosk. And we have a contract with the Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security, and maybe that's the next phase. So we're addressing different markets and different technologies, and what I'm saying here, what I started asking myself, is this the right walk, and this is the right hill? And maybe it's not about Sisyphean, it's a different great philosopher here that we should quote. It's about Heraclitus. You cannot swim in the same river twice. And that's what I'm doing with Mitigate. And each company that I launched has a different investor, different team, technology, IP, target market, and so forth. And what I can also say to wrap it up, that experience, hopefully maybe at least savvy, not successful, but at least savvy. And I've made enough startup mistakes to start teaching. I taught business and entrepreneurship at Stanford, and I gave a TED talk. And most importantly, I became a better member, I hope, of the startup ecosystem, and my ability to contribute as a board member, CEO, founder, venture investor is hopefully much better now than it was 17 years ago when I became a young entrepreneur.
That makes a lot of sense. Lilach, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I'll just add quickly. Super quickly. I do think that there's some selection bias, right? To the people who are kind of sitting here and discussing, right? To where we started this discussion. There is a reason why Erez is sitting here and not the guy who's living in his mom's basement. And I think when asking, like, is failing too many times, is that like a bad thing, or is there such thing as failing too many times? I think we often do hear the Erez story or the Steve Jobs story, but there's probably many, 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 many more stories on the other side of people who did persist through situations where, that perhaps they that was one or many mistakes too many. Not to say that it's the end of the world, but I do think that failure is like a thing. It's not always just like failure equals success or failure equals at the end of the day, then you'll persist. I think there's a fine line between persisting through a situation, which I think is probably like the one thing that, entrepreneurs must have, right? They need to persist and be very, very self-assured and, kind of direct themselves through a lot of situations, a lot of rejections, a lot of failures. But I think there's also a fine line between that and, again, knowing when you're probably not going through the right path for you. And it comes down to kind of Erez's lawyer answer of like, it depends, right? I think it really does come down to a lot of self-awareness and understanding what, again, like who you are, what you're doing, why you're failing, and be able to assess the situation that you're in a way that gives you clarity over these questions. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong answer, but I do think that being self-aware to who you are and what you're doing is going to be key in these situations, in these moments. Like I've seen myself and people, that I've worked with, or, in personal situations, just keep repeating the same mistake over and over again. And again, if you're not learning from it, either in a way of like, back to your basketball example, like maybe you can hire a coach to help you figure it out, or learning from it in a sense of saying, well, you know what, maybe this is not my gift. Maybe my talent and my time is better spent elsewhere. Like there needs to be some level of evolution through these failures, in my mind, to help you get to that next level. But kudos to Steve Jobs, obviously. I mean, obviously he knew something that other people didn't. To tell you that that's the case all the time, I don't think so.
That's fair. Yeah, I think he ended up doing okay. So
yeah.
Okay, so now, what was that, Erez?
I know.
Okay, so now I have one more question that I thought of while we're talking, but I want to open it up now to the Q&A. So I know we have a few questions already. But if you do have one, please type it into the Q&A chat box. And again, we'll try to get to as many as we can. So the first is from Sarah Siegel. So she said, I heard Micah's comments about the hero's journey. Still right now, I'm writing my first play and I'm struggling with showing the flaws of my characters because one of them is based on me. Even as I hear all of you and know that failures are more interesting than successes, I'm still struggling. How would you encourage me to go deeper and expose the character's flaws?
Well, I guess one thing I want to add, and I'll answer Sarah's question specifically, but just thinking about what we're talking about a lot of this like failure in the professional context of how to, navigate the world of jobs and career paths, etc. The one thing I want to just touch on is like, it's so important to be able to separate professional success and failure from like how you base your own self-worth. You can be a miserable screw up at a job and still be a good person and be a good family member and friend and all those things. And I think especially in the United States, we define ourselves a lot by what we do for a living. I think often to our detriment. So I just want to add that one piece of it, that whether you're failing or succeeding in business, like try to find some way to separate that from your own personal self-worth. So to Sarah's point about exposing characters' flaws, I think it's really, really difficult, but I think it's the same thing as with anything, is like, you just have to be willing to let go and not, write it. And then you can always scale it back if you're unhappy with the output. But if you don't do it in the first place, then you have nothing to revise, nothing to edit. So I totally understand the struggle. Anything that's, putting your own flaws out there. But the truth is, nobody lives in your headspace but you. So no one else is thinking about whether this character is reminiscent of you. They're thinking about their own flaws and all the things that they have to do in their own lives. So I would say try to remember that that's a voice that's happening in your head, but no one else is necessarily seeing it the way you're seeing it.
All right, good answer. So next, unless anyone else has anything else to add to that.
Well, maybe just with a quick answer. We should break that equation that we all have in our head between what we do and what we're worth, or we, and it's so, and we all do it, and it's really hard work to not think about things this way. Don't have an easy solution how to separate it, but it has to be, we shouldn't look at things. It's just legitimate to fail, and it doesn't mean that we are failures. That's the equation that we have to break.
All right, that's a very good point. So thanks to you guys for answering that. Next, we have a question from Emily White. I had a very big startup failure in 2008 after 7 years focused on a startup. I noticed that when I think about starting something else up as a founder, I still have so much anxiety about it. You're already discussing this, but if you have anything else to offer, she would appreciate it. Anyone want to offer some encouragement?
I have the exact opposite, but if I have, today I'm a mentor to young entrepreneurs, and the first thing I tell them is don't do it if you don't have to. It's hard. It's not for everyone, and it's not very rewarding most of the time. And people compare it. Use this analogy many times that it's a roller coaster. I would say the roller coaster, but they don't understand what it means, because when you're in a roller coaster, you should enjoy the ride. It's not about getting to the end. Enjoy the ride, for crying out loud. That's what you should do when you're in a roller coaster. So if you didn't enjoy it, hey, find something that you enjoy. If you did enjoy something, well, in those 7 years, do it again, by all means. I think we should make things that make us happy. This is also a meaning of success, at least based on the Google answer that I've found. If you are willing, Miriam, to giving later the personal contacts, I don't mind taking a personal conversation. I love, this is a part of me giving back to this ecosystem, but it's hard to be an entrepreneur. It's harder to do it in isolation. I'd love to support, and that's it.
It's very generous of you. So next we have a question from, hold on one second, from Adi, who says it's a great discussion. And what about the role of luck, which is not something we have touched on yet? So actually, I'll ask Lilach, what do you think the role of luck is when it comes to I guess being successful or being able to have great opportunities?
I think it's a great question. I think people, in my mind, underestimate luck. We're all lucky in a sense, right? We're lucky to be born to some of the privileges that we take for granted. We're lucky for the opportunities that we have, and I think people, there's a lot of research on it. Sorry to bring research back to the table, but there's a lot of research on how people, and I think especially men, by the way, tend to kind of take credit for their successes, but kind of dump failure back onto like the circumstances or other people that kind of may have led to these situations. I think the matter of fact that there is chance and circumstances in the world, and luck is really a thing. But I do also believe in that, saying that basically, I can't remember exactly how it goes, but something along the lines of like people who are prepared get lucky. So you have to, I mean, you can't, I'll take it to the extreme. You can't win the lottery if you haven't bought the ticket, right? And you can't get that dream job if you've never studied for it, if you've never applied, if you haven't like interviewed. So yes, there's a luck element for that job to be open, for you to have a good vibe with your interviewer, for you to have the right skills for it. But there's a lot of preparation that goes into that. I do think luck is a thing. So I'll just end it with that.
All right, Micah.
Yeah.
Erez?
Yeah, I think I translate luck to timing many times, because timing is everything, they say. It's and timing. You know, I saw the question in the chat box, and this is a Digamon, and in a Digamon, who I had a very quick conversation with him. He was a pilot in the same unit that brought the hostages back from Entebbe. But the timing, he was there too early. So he already was released from service when that unit brought the hostages back. So it is about timing. In my startups, it was timing. I can tell you a quick, funny story. My second startup was shut down because we were focused on viral infection in non-invasively. And that was a diagnostic company that we put together. We had quick, inexpensive diagnostics for infectious diseases. And my investors didn't want to put more money, which is a red flag and for new investors, and said there is no market for infectious diseases anywhere in the world, only in developing countries. And there are no payers in developing countries. And that was, just to explain how absurd that was, in the fall of 2019, maybe 2 months before COVID. And I had to shut down the company because it was the wrong timing. So that's the component of luck, or that I, again, translate to timing. Sometimes you're too late or too early. That's the component. You do need luck. I admit it. It's not just making it, it's making it on time.
It's a valid point. Micah?
Yeah, I'll add on to what both Lilach and Erez were saying about timing and also the preparation being so important. So when I worked at the Hawks, for those who might be basketball fans or not, the Atlanta Hawks are not historically a successful team. And for most of the time that I worked there, that was the case. We were pretty much irrelevant in the NBA for most of my tenure. Well, our job as digital marketers is to try to get people excited about the team and do interesting things. And we were constantly innovating and getting no reaction to it. So you talk about, is something failure, is something a mistake, etc. We were basically just shouting into the void. But I loved the ideas that we had, and the fact that people weren't responding to them, was information, but it wasn't the entire picture. Well, my last year with the team out of nowhere was incredible, and they won 60 games. And all of a sudden, all of the stuff we were doing was getting tons of publicity, tons of coverage. We got an award for, the best social media marketing in the NBA that year. We didn't do anything different as far as I was concerned from what we were doing the previous years. Why all of a sudden were we getting such hosannas? It's because the team all of a sudden was good, and now people were seeing the stuff we'd been doing. We could have given up doing all that stuff because it wasn't getting traction, but we were ready for that moment when it came, and when the spotlight was on us, we already had things in place that we were happy about and proud of that we could execute on. But if the team hadn't been any good, we would have continued to flounder in that way. So there's so much of it that is timing and preparation.
Yeah, I think that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add just on that, or kind of adjacent to that, it's really important to not beat yourself up just because the sheer luck element of things. I think both in the personal spectrum and in the professional one as well, when things don't go your way, it's really, really important to not beat yourself up, to not take things personally, and to understand that some things are just not going to happen your way. Without getting into like the failure discussion that is relevant and important, just to kind of take things as they are and understand that you don't have control over everything, and be okay with that.
I can admit that me not having control over things is also very hard. So I'm glad you brought that up. And sometimes you have to just let go. So with that, we are just about out of time. So I want to thank our three panelists, Erez, Micah, and Lilach. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending. If you would like to ask any other questions we didn't get a chance to get to today, please feel free to email me at alumni@afhu.org, and I'm happy to make the connection to all or any of the panelists you'd like to hear from. And again, thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you again soon. And if you would like to learn again more about getting involved with us or making a gift, please email alumni@afhu.org. And we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you very much.